very strange experience. That's
so you
right.
just had a wall of lockers.
You had a wall of lockers in front of your nose and your friend right next to you, you know. And then, you know, when the appointed time comes, everything starts shaking and, you know, bouncing off the lockers and you're just being thrown around.
In a very, very mild way, I know what you mean. Within my first couple of trips to the bomber aircraft, I hadn't got a window.
There you go. So you're a navigator in the bowels of some
Exactly.
Wellington or something.
Yeah.
It's just got to be brave. Sit there and be brave, right? So, but my first flight up there, I was sitting under this window and I had a mirror, so I could point it up like that, and I actually watched in my rear view mirror. I watched Florida just getting smaller and smaller behind me and tip over the horizon. I could see the plume going all the way back down to Florida and a shadow across the ocean of the plume, and then just hammering up into orbit. So it is exciting. Particularly launches are very, very exciting. They're not like anything else you really experience.
And then you're in space.
And then after 8.5 minutes and, you know, 10 years of training, you're finally in space. There's this big blue planet, this black sky, and you're sailing along faster than you can imagine.
So what are the big achievements for shuttle?
It made access to space semi-routine with very large payloads. It gave us a space station. We assembled a large structure in orbit, which is something we're going to have to do if we're going to go into deep space, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Fix some space telescopes.
Thank you.
That's right.
Launched several others, and of course several planetary probes as well.
That's right. Did a lot of science and taught us an awful lot about how to operate in orbit, how to plan something and do the engineering in space.
Hey, Pierce? Yeah. Take a second and look. I think you got Ireland and England coming up there. Wow. Oh, my goodness.
And what's your forecast for the next 30 years?
I worry that I will not see humans on Mars in my lifetime, but I'm still optimistic, and I may see human beings visiting an asteroid, and I think that is the real excitement and challenge for me, that we are going to see a return to human exploration of deep space.
What about you?
Oh, I think we're going to go to Mars. Alan just has to concentrate on clean living, so he lives long enough to see it. But in the last few years, we're finding out more and more about Mars.
We are indeed, I realise that.
Now we have these streams of brine water.
It's getting there.
Flowing. So there's plenty out there.
If we get to Mars, it's all right.
Yes, we have to get there, but now I think there's more and more reason to go.
I agree.
Which is that, you know, Mars, 2 billion years ago, it was wet, it was warm, had an ocean. So who knows what might have evolved back then.
Quite.
And I think the only way we're going to find out is send, you know, one of our kids at this rate to go and dig it up.
Well, you will find out more than I will, because after all, I am 88, so I haven't got much time left.
You're in your prime, man.
But you have. What's your forecast?
30 years, American spaceflight or human spaceflight? Because I think there's a difference. Which do you want to know about?
You mean you don't regard the Americans as human?
Well,
I'm not sure if I do.
Yes, you're pretending to be British, Piers, we know that. No, but I mean, I think if you look at the American space program, I'm afraid I'm fairly pessimistic about the next 30 years. You know, I do believe that...
I hope you're wrong.
I hope I'm wrong too. I think the private space flight will take care of the station, but I just don't see any political will in the States to spend money on this. Elsewhere, though, you've got the Chinese, who are in some ways back in the old space race. Well, that's true, and both of those countries are in the space race mentality. It's about national prestige, and we know, because we've seen it happen in the 60s, that can drive at least a program to touch the lunar surface. So I think within your 30 years, we will have had a Chinese equivalent to the Apollo program. Whether they do more with it afterwards than the Americans did, or whether they go a different route,
We've got to wait and see. Well, Piers and you, thank you very much. It's been a great program, one that's never going to be forgotten. Certainly not by you, since you've actually been there.
Thank you.
Having fired the imagination of a generation, a ship like no other, its place in history secured, the space shuttle pulls into port for the last time. Its voyage at an end.
So now, where next? I'm going to ask now Chris Lintoff to take up the story.
Mars, the next frontier for man, seems such an obvious step in space exploration. So why aren't we on our way? After all, we're always talking about it as if it's only around the corner. In the early half of the last century, we had such bold ideas about spaceflight. These drawings by R.A. Smith assumed that we'd be on Mars by the end of the 20th century at the absolute latest.
these wonderful old science fiction books of Patrick's, mostly written in the 1950s, are a reminder that space travel hasn't always been about arguing about money and politics, but that it used to be a place for visionaries who could think up spacecraft, the likes of which we can only dream of today.
Those dreams soon started to become a reality. This program from 1957 is about spaceflight, featuring a prototype RAF spacesuit. Here is a very familiar young man talking about his dreams of interplanetary travel.
Well, nobody in the British Interplanetary Society underestimates the difficulties, but they have made very considerable contributions to what has been going on, and in particular, a good deal of the early theoretical work on Earth's satellite was carried out by its members.
The space race accelerated our ambitions for space travel, and the success of Apollo fueled expectations that Mars must be the next stop. But it was not to be. The commitment to the space shuttle and then to the space station proved to be nothing more than a space cul-de-sac.
You know, it looks much better.
The last manned mission to the moon was Apollo 17 in 1972. Its commander, Captain Eugene Cernan, has a very personal stake in America's space program.
Houston, this has got to be one of the most proud moments of my life, I guarantee you. Roger 17, and we thank you very much.
His final boot prints on the lunar surface, now nearly 40 years old, remain the high watermark for human exploration of the solar system. This is how he felt about it back in 2008.
I'm a little disappointed with what's gone on for the last 30 years. You know, we don't have the capability to go back to the moon today. We're trying to redevelop it all over again. We're living relatively in the comfort and confines of our own home planet, 200, 300 miles away. We've been spending time trying to exploit space. From my point of view, it doesn't go anywhere. You know, when you've been to the moon, not once but twice, staying home, you know, this sounds a little arrogant. Staying home is no longer good enough. We've been there, done that. Let's get on with it.
3, 2, 1, ignition. Burn away, Houston. Vector good.
Astronomer Stuart Clark has been following the space program closely. I chatted to him about why we've become so disappointingly tied to Earth.
In a sense, it's lack of money, and it's also a product of the time at which those early dreams were born. So we were coming out of the Second World War. There was a feeling of optimism, and that now was a new start, and that new start dovetailed with the beginning of the space age, and so those kind of utopian visions.
Anything can happen.
Anything can happen. What in fact happened was a collapse of that optimism into really a kind of a market-driven force. And what can space do for us?
It's not just the lack of money that stopped us surfing the solar system. There are considerable obstacles to overcome if we're ever to go to Mars.
Mars is one of the trickiest places to land in the solar system because the planet is large enough to have quite a strong gravitational field, so you have to have extremely powerful retro rockets to bring you down safely. And the other thing about it is that it's far away, and that increases the risk of radiation from the sun.
And we've only talked about getting there. Getting back is a problem as well, of course. I mean, what would you do? Build your own fuel on the surface?
That's pretty much the way people think now, is that you have to try and manufacture the fuel actually on the surface of Mars itself, because it would just be too big and too heavy to take with you.
We do still have dreamers. Meet Icarus, a visionary design for a robotic mission to the stars, developed by the British Interplanetary Society and their colleagues. It may look like science fiction today, but who knows? In 200 years, this may be science fact. With the end of the shuttle, NASA's relying on hitching a ride on Russian rockets to provide the space station with its supplies and with fresh crew. This month's disaster, when an unmanned Russian rocket exploded, losing its cargo,